All right, folks. Today is a treat. We have Eimear Marrinan with us. Eimear, thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure always to chat to you. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about your role before we get started.
Totally. So I am Director of Culture at Hubspot. Hubspot is a leading CRM or customer relationship management software company for scaling companies. And so my role at Hubspot is really to think through our company culture. At Hubspot, we're completely culture obsessed. We published a culture code externally, which has had more than 5 million views. So definitely check that out. And we really think that culture is the product that we're building for ourselves. And I think, it's something that we obviously hold near and dear to our heart. I try and not break that and really set culture up for success and drive so much of what we talk about in the culture code internally.
Yes. Oh, and look, we have this in common, right? Culture is like it's everything, right? It's just
Totally.
like our personality. It's a personality of an individual, a culture of a company. And I define culture. Well, let me not do that. How do you define
Yeah.
culture?
I love that you asked that question because I think the definition of culture is such an interesting topic right now because culture seems to be getting lost in the mix. I think you said it perfectly, Anna. Culture, in my mind, it's a company's collective personality. And the fundamentals and basics of culture is all about a company's mission, their vision, their values, and their behaviors. So it's how you hire, it's how you promote and you reward, it's how you make decisions, it's how you get things done at scale. And I think what's interesting is there's been this like misconception or this shift over the last few years where culture has become directly related to the physical and to an office. And so I think when people think of culture right now, some people think of like ping pong tables, they think of break rooms, they think of coffee, they think of free perks. And that's exactly what that stuff is. It's perks and benefits. And then, especially now, when those four walls and the office has been taken away from us, so many companies have actually been exposed. When you don't spend enough time investing in the real fundamentals and the values and behaviors and actually making sure that your organization are driving the right things, I think companies are kind of facing a bit of a culture crisis. So I love the initial question, what is culture? Define culture. I think the more we bring culture back to the basics right now, the more that's going to set us up for success as we all navigate the funkiness of the world.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it, Emer. Like we spent and as somebody who worked for a startup and we had beer in the fridge all the time. And by
Yeah.
the way, when I first started there, I was up to like 7 Dr. Peppers a day because they were just in the fridge. So we could talk about perks, but that's perks, right? Like
Yes.
culture is the outcome of our daily habits and behaviors and the way that we treat each other. And let's be honest, Emer, that shifted this year. The way we worked shifted, the way we connected shifted. I'm
Yeah.
not saying all for the worse, but it did change this year. So as we're talking about retrofitting our culture or our talent into this new way of working, which
Yeah.
maybe is all remote, maybe hybrid, maybe people are planning to go all the way back in the office. Who knows where they're at? But regardless, we need to be thinking about now. How do
Yeah.
we nurture the human side? I think human and performance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I think that's especially important when we won't have an office in many situations. And obviously, in a lot of situations, some companies are going all remote, some companies are going hybrid. At HubSpot, we published our future of work model last year, and we're fully transitioning to a hybrid model. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about what that means in all regards, and especially what that means as it relates to our culture. And I think one of the most important things to do is think about those behaviors and values. And as you're making that transition, are the behaviors and values that you're driving actually the right things? And will they enable that transition, or actually will they become a blocker? So if you have a pretty fixed or a rigid kind of work environment, like what will that look like as you work towards a more hybrid transition? If you are very heavily in office, in person kind of oriented, how does that translate into like a remote or a hybrid world? I really think going back to the basics and not spending so much time thinking about like, oh, how can we recreate all of these in-office perks online? I think that's where there's a lot of wasted energy and time right now. And I think that's just scramble. I don't think that's the meaningful stuff that's actually going to really make the difference.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think, this was a gap before, but it's
Yeah.
certainly a gap now in the sense of we have the mission and the vision. Maybe it was written on the wall, on
Yeah.
posters, maybe we posted online, maybe we even have our values. But I think the gap is we have those, but people actually don't know how to live those out.
Totally.
Has HubSpot spent time around that, describing like what is that actually? So if we're an innovative culture, how do I act? How do I sound if I'm being innovative?
Yeah, I think that is such a good point. And I think the other interesting thing is sometimes you'll have companies that say these things, this is what our culture is, but then actually what's happening and the behaviors that people experience are completely contrary to that.
Yes.
One of the things that we did actually last year, which was really interesting, is we measured our culture. And so we run quarterly pulse surveys, as a ton of other companies do. And what we did is we actually asked employees, are these specific behaviors and values that we lay out being displayed in the way you interact with others and the way your manager is kind of treating you? And I thought that was such brilliant insight because it was a
Yes.
test of our culture, and it helped us understand, A, is our culture actually doing what it should do in the first
Mm,
place?
mm.
Is our culture evolving in the right way? And do we have a specific gap that we really need to focus on? So I think that's something that I would definitely recommend all companies do, especially as we move through this transition. Like, it's really a pulse that we should keep on top of. I think to your first point, though, have we spent time really thinking through what it means to like display these values and behaviors? I think we have. It is hard because I think the other thing is culture should be personal. So I think
Mhm.
culture should show up in different ways to different people. And I think sometimes you run the risk of being overly prescriptive. And as a new hire into a new company, if you are overly prescriptive, I think you can go down that wormhole hole of, if I don't do these 5 things, I'm not displaying your culture. So I
Mm.
think we've tried to really talk about our values and behaviors through storytelling and through like different enablement materials that we've given to our managers, to like how we reward, for example, to how we talk, to messages that we like speak to in our company meeting and things like that, without almost giving like a handbook on this is what culture is. There always should be that level of flexibility for employees, for sure.
Agreed, right? But a direction, right? Are we
A
going
direction,
south
exactly.
or are we going east? That is a
Exactly.
great start. And honestly, I would say most companies who are listening to this have some work to do there, right? Because one day we're doing a lot of this, and the employee just kind of, honestly, what happens over time is they stay put or they start to back up. They're not even going in any direction.
Yeah, completely. I agree with you. And I think also like a culture evolves, and that's okay. I think
Mm,
there is like a sometimes people get frightened that, oh, this is my culture and it'll always stay like that. And especially right now, like our culture will absolutely evolve. You just need to really make sure that it's evolving in the right way. And like I say,
right.
assess that culture at really meaningful and intentional moments, and then fix what's not working. We're all going to make mistakes through this process. Like, we're
Mhm.
all doing this for the first time. HubSpot are obviously transitioning to hybrid for the first time. And so I
Right.
think learning from those mistakes and actually asking for that feedback from our employees and listening to our employees, I
Mm.
think that is so, so important. And again, the more we do that, the better, I think.
Yeah. Can I add a third one? So ask,
Yes, do.
listen, and act.
And act,
We have to
100%. Agreed.
act. I feel like a lot of organizations that I've worked in or with or hear about ask, right? We do the annual engagement survey, we do the quarterly pulse surveys, but what are you acting on? And how, list out all the ideas that everybody shared. And then talk about the ones that you can do and talk about the ones you can't do. Explain that. Even if it's like we really just don't have the time or energy to do all these things. Isn't that a better explanation than we don't care about your ideas?
I love that. And I'm so happy you brought that up, actually. Thank you. Because how frustrating, we've all been there when we have tons of ideas. We're talking about them, we're giving feedback, but they're actually not actively being listened to or acknowledged or acted upon. I
Mhm.
think willingness to act is incredibly important and is what's setting leaders apart and is a key to
Mm.
keeping employees engaged right now. I mean, we do, like, HubSpot believes that people is our best perk. That, our culture does live in our heart, it doesn't live in our hallways. And so I think without our employees' feedback and without, exactly like you said, acting on that feedback, we kind of have like we're stuck.
Yes, yes. And you know, for the leaders out there, I think one of the things I want to go back to that you shared that HubSpot is doing is that you actually gut checked. Are we living out these
Yeah.
values? Right? Just because honestly, there's a gap between the perception of the higher ups, no matter how big your organization is, they're going to think and feel like they're on the right track, right? Because they just don't have as much access day to day with the people. So we have to ask, are we really doing this? Like, can you give me, what's an example of one value that you have at HubSpot?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually, our values make up the acronym HEART. So this concept of our values living in our heart and not in our hallways is a pun
Okay.
that we love. But HEART stands for humble, empathetic, adaptable, remarkable, and transparent. And again, the way we recognize and reward truly show up in our values. So during our company meetings every quarter, we have heart awards where we recognize employees that have shown heart. We have the option of actually giving peer bonus to folks, like on a kind of ad hoc basis, if you've displayed heart, and kind of all of that recognition tool is actually linked to those core values.
Mm.
And so I think all of that stuff is important. Again, culture should promote, you know, how you reward and how you recognize. And so making sure that you really do have that tie is incredibly important. I mean, it's one of the things, like we, you know, we speak a lot about culture add and not culture fit at HubSpot, but when we're hiring, like, you know, making sure that that our candidates display heart, and openly talking about this concept of heart to our candidates is also really important. So really making sure that we're doing that from the very beginning.
Yes. So let's be extra clear for people. Let's pick one of those, your HEART. And then can you give us an example of how one would display that within HubSpot?
Yeah, I love it. So we'll go for, I mean, I can talk through all of these, but T is a really good one. So
Okay.
transparency. So HubSpot is an incredibly transparent company, and we actually treat every single person as if we're like an insider. So we share so much information about our performance, about our product, about what's happening across the company. And we openly trust our employees, and we ask them not to disclose specific confidential information. So we use an internal wiki to do a lot of that. We have Slack channels where our execs and our CEO hops in. During COVID-19 and still now, we actually hosted really regular executive AMAs where all employees had the option of asking whatever they wanted to our executives, and getting that transparent level of information was really important. Again, our wiki is actually a pretty underrated but super powerful tool. It's a way for employees, departments, leaders to share what's happening, and everybody in the company can actually see that. So I think that level of transparency is actually really, really important. I think the other piece then, the or, remarkable. So we really reward remarkable work. And so again, going above and beyond and really pinning, and especially now that it's not about the time you spend on your work, it's about the results that you produce, and making sure that those results are truly, truly remarkable.
Mm.
I think, you know, empathy has been shown completely, and like, especially now, one of the things that we've really leaned into is empathy. Perfect example is all of our caregivers who are working at home right now with kids. And I think encouraging our managers to lean into empathy, ask the question, be vulnerable, and ask caregivers to be vulnerable with them, so our teams can lean in and really help those caregivers, has been really, really important.
Mm.
Um, and being empathetic in terms of understanding that employees, that people are just going through a really tough time right now. And we need to be mindful of that. And we really do need to lean into that and ask those questions, and kind of just spend time and reflect with our employees.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's
Oh,
just
good.
good for us to hear how we can take a value and make it really tangible, and a behavior. Again, if our culture is the outcome of our daily habits and behavior, we need to be able to bring our values to life through storytelling, through those examples, and through rewarding the behavior. So I think HubSpot is
Exactly.
doing really good job at that. But let's be real here, Eimear. You at HubSpot, you are retrofitting in many cases, and you have
Yeah.
declared now you're moving towards a hybrid.
Yeah.
What bumps in the road, what challenges, what maybe failures or errors did you make that maybe we can learn from?
It is such a good question. We've made a lot. Don't worry.
Okay.
I think, honestly, I think one of the biggest things that we've learned from, let's say, is doing something without asking our employees. And so I think there's always an assumption that you're just going to, like, drive forward as a company, but actually not ask for feedback. And there was
Mhm.
certainly an assumption when we initially all were forced remote during COVID-19 of what our employees actually wanted. And so we stopped and we asked our employees via, again, a survey, what future work model was their preference, and the results were fantastic. So really what our employees wanted was not one model or another, but actually that level of flexibility to choose something. Without that feedback and without acting on that feedback, I'm not sure we would have come to where we did today. And so I think that was a really important lesson for us. Don't assume that you know everything. Ask for advice, and then exactly what you said, act on that advice. um, I think the other thing is, like, HubSpot is a big company. We 4,000, over 4,000 employees globally, and there are always going to be like global and cultural nuances across the globe. And I think uh, recognizing those is also really important. I think there is, there's often a tendency to just jump into one way. Sorry, I've totally lost my train of thought now, and I'm going to have to actually stop that.
No, that's okay. We got that. We will edit that out. So we talked
Sorry.
about so many employees, global nuances. There's often a tendency.
Yes.
Does that help at all?
What was I even trying to say?
We said we don't want everybody to assume we know everything. There's some global nuances. We're a big
Yeah.
company.
I think again there's sometimes, is it, will I pause and just keep going? Is that the
Yeah,
best thing
keep
to
going.
do?
We're going to edit it out.
Sorry, Anna, thank you.
No worries.
I think the other, consideration and thing that we're constantly learning from is recognizing that there are global nuances across the globe. And so obviously we try and adopt one approach where possible, but I think it's important to flex depending on what's happening in different locations and different regions, depending on what's happening obviously for COVID-19 in terms of like local legislation and local restrictions, and even seeing the differences between people's work preferences based on where they're located, I think is important. So I think acknowledging those local nuances is just something that I would keep in mind
Mhm.
going forward, and encouraging all companies to kind of keep in mind going forward.
Yeah.
And then I think the other piece is more like, again, kind of culture and experience related. I think at the very start of COVID-19, and it was a brilliant learning for us as we transition into a hybrid world, it was almost like everybody and every company tried to just recreate their culture online, or recreate their
Lift
experiences
and
online,
shift.
right? Yes.
Yes.
And what that resulted in was just tons of Zooms, tons of like online events. Like, culture again came back to events and fun and experiences.
Mm.
And so what we didn't spend enough time doing was actually enabling our culture, enabling our managers, really thinking through what was meaningful, how to avoid that Zoom fatigue, and again, asking for feedback. We have an ERG at HubSpot called Families at HubSpot. At the start of COVID-19, again, we had great resources online. We had teachers that were teaching kids, lots of fun events. We pulsed our Families at HubSpot group about 3-4 months in. And actually what that group wanted was like help with their kids offline, and not more Zoom program, but actually offline help.
Yeah.
Some like tactical advice from their managers around how to structure their days, help in like reducing the guilt that they feel about trying to juggle having kids at home, feeding their kids, working, showing up for their team in the right way.
Yeah.
And that's what they wanted. And again, so I think not making the assumption as you move into a hybrid world that all you need to do is throw a load of Zoom links online and you're fine. Like, that's not going to set you up for success at all.
Yeah. And don't you think too, Emer, that we have to ask and then ask again, right? I was talking to a leader
Yeah.
at a Fortune 100 company, probably 6 months into the pandemic, and they were talking about a habit that they had of these daily stand-up meetings. And I said, "Oh, how's that working?" "Oh, yeah, it's working so great." And I said,
Yeah.
"When's the last time you asked your team how that's working for them?" He's like, "Oh, last time we got feedback." I said, "Yeah, but when was the last time?" Right? It's been a few months. Things are
Yeah.
changing fast. So I love that you do those pulse surveys. And I think people need to get really specific. Is this working for you? And you did something really well there. You tackled a specific group. There's working parents, there's these caregiver groups, right? There
Totally.
are, we could get into all of the groups, but we need to be isolating in the sense of getting feedback. We need to be isolating those groups.
I completely agree. And I think like the other interesting thing that comes to mind is and it's still a challenge, and it'll be interesting to see how other companies solve for this, is communications across the board. I think,
Mm.
again, there is such a focus right now as companies transition and retrofit on asynchronous comms. And I just spoke about HubSpot being a very transparent company. And I think what that translated to was an overload of comms. And we've reached a stage now where actually employees are getting too much comms. And
Mm.
so again, I think it's being really thoughtful around how you communicate in the right way to different groups, like the groups that you're just speaking about, but also how you make sure your culture doesn't conflict with what's going to work for the long term. And being really intentional and purposeful around how you actually set up some of these like practices and processes in a sustainable way and in a way that will last for the long term. Because something that we do forget is, like, right now we're not a hybrid company, we're on that journey. And so what's working right now, like, we are still in firefighting mode, as is all
Yes.
companies. So we do need to spend time thinking through how we can sustainably now set up HubSpot and all companies in a way that will last, and not in a way again that will burn out in like 6 months' time.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, scrappy to sustainable,
Scrappy
right?
to sustainable, absolutely.
Oh, and look, as we're wrapping up here, Emer, I want to make sure we leave because I think we have leaders, we have executives, we have founders listening, but we also have the employee who's like listening to what you're saying. Like, how do we do it? How can I help my organization do it? Can you leave with
Yes.
one piece of advice? I like to sandwich it, right? What can the system do, but also what can the person do?
Yes, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing for a person right now is to be intentional,
Mm.
be very thoughtful, and very purposeful. And I think through all of this transition, the one thing that we're going to have to do is lead with inclusion in everything that we do going forward. The one thing that we actually didn't cover, which is important for every single person at every single level, is being hybrid means that we have to lead inclusively across the board. Inclusivity in terms of how you hold your team meetings, in terms of how you communicate, in terms of how you like show up and lead with empathy when all of a sudden you have some people in the room, you've some people on video conference, you've some people in different locations,
Yeah.
how you consider people's time zones. Like, they're real, genuine tactical things that people are facing right now. And I think all employees can think through that, like leading inclusively in this hybrid environment, I think is going to be so, so important.
Yes. And I love that you said all employees can contribute to that,
Oh, a
right?
hundred
I mean, listen,
percent.
we can all view ourselves as impactful entrepreneurs. It is our obligation. We are choosing to work at this organization. So I'm going to make an impact on my team, on this company, and I'm going to help get us from here to there. It's up to all of us. That sounds so cheesy, but it's so true.
It is. And like, share the feedback. I mean, I think the worst leader is somebody who assumes they know it all. You don't. And so,
Mm.
what I would love, like, I ask my team this all the time, like, share with me what's working, share with me what's not. We're also total individuals as human beings. And so, you can give guidelines and policies, but what works for one team is not going to work for another team. And so I do think leading through storytelling, but with overarching principles of like inclusive first, make sure that you are like virtually inclusive, that you're empathetic, that you're like asking and not assuming, all of those guiding principles, I think, as opposed to these are exactly the things that we have to do and every team has to follow them,
Mm.
I think is important, because hybrid is very personal as well from a kind of a personality perspective in a way.
Yes, and that is one big takeaway from our conversation, Emer, is that this needs to be specific and outlined, but not too detailed that it takes away the personal side of that. So let's leave that one last tip of advice for the system, for the organization. What should they be thinking about if you could leave them with one piece of advice?
Yeah, I actually do think it comes back to ask your
Asking.
employees, and act on that. And even if you're not going to act on it, tell them that you're not, and explain the why.
Yes. Right. Explain the why. I appreciate this, Emer. You're going through this at HubSpot. So maybe we'll do another one in the future that is for like
Yes.
2.0 lessons learned. I really just appreciate you taking the time to share your experience with us, to share your thought leadership. And it's a very generous act. And I appreciate what you're doing at HubSpot for
Oh, I'm
culture and people.
so happy to do it. I mean, I said at the start that we're learning too. We're going to make a ton of mistakes,
Yes.
and so the more we
Yes.
share these learnings, I love learning from other companies in terms of what they're doing, the better. So all good. Happy to do that.
Yes. All right, guys. Peace and progress.